Hello students and welcome back to our graphic design class. So we are still in chapter 1, lesson 3, the principles of design. Before we proceed, I would ask for your full participation and please focus, take note because the principles of design is one of the most important or most critical part of our graphic design course or subject. Okay? Take note that failure to understand the principles of design may lead you to a failed graphic design project in the future. Here are our learning objectives. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to create various graphic design projects using the 7 elements of design, which was discussed in the previous lesson. At the same time, the principles of design should be applied to ensure the success of your graphic design project. So these are our learning objectives. These are expected from you after you watch this video tutorial or after you understood this video tutorial. Having discussed the elements of design in lesson 2, we will now look at how to apply it. We refer to this as the principles of design. So the principles of design are actually the rules a designer must follow to create an effective and attractive composition. So these principles are guidelines that are used to visually communicate the ideas represented by the elements. So we have 7 elements. We have shape, we have line, we have texture, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now that we know na pwede natin gamitin yung elements na yon, combine them for us to create a composition or a graphic design artwork, ang pag-aaralan naman natin ngayon, what is the proper way to combine these elements? What is the proper way or what are the guidelines for us to properly use these elements? So, doon papasok ang principles of design. The fundamental principles of design are the following. So we have focal point or emphasis, we have contrast, balance, movement, pattern or rhythm, unity, and of course, the theory of Gestalt. Let's start with the first principle of design. Focal point or emphasis deals with the parts of a design that are meant to stand out. In most cases, this means the most important information the design is meant to convey. Like the word sail here. The font, typeface, the font style, and the font size of the word sail is formatted in a different manner to create a focal point or emphasis. So the tendency is, if you open their website, the first thing you will notice is actually the word sail. Adding emphasis to an object creates a focal point, which grabs an audience's attention. It's where you want the viewer to look first, but doesn't overpower the rest of the design. Focal point or emphasis can be created by color. We can also create emphasis by scale or size. Emphasis or focal point can also be created by isolation, pointing, and framing. How to create a focal point using color? The answer is use contrasting colors to create a difference, like how Twilio, the website of Twilio, uses the focal point principle to draw your eye to their call to action button. Okay? Even me, honestly, when I opened their website, ang unang napansin ko is this part. Okay? So, ang emphasis nandito. Nasa kanya yung heaviest weight. Color contrasts include pairing warm colors to cool colors, neutral colors with saturated colors, light color with dark color, and among others. Okay, so colors will be discussed in detail sa next lesson natin. If everything is fairly light in color, you introduce a darker color. The darker color will stand out from the lightness. If you're working mostly with neutral color accents, add an element or two with a brighter, more saturated color to draw attention and create visual interest. If your color palette is dominantly cool hues or cool colors, introduce an element in a warm color and it will separate visually from the rest. How to create a focal point using size or scale. Change the size of an element. Scale it larger or smaller than other elements so that it stands out from the rest, like in this example. So if you open this poster, the first thing you will notice is the picture. Siya yung may pinakamalaking size dyan eh. The next one is grand, opening. And then the word grand. And then the date, because we tend to read from top to bottom. Okay, and then book a tour today and the wordings underneath the big font or big text here at the top. Okay. If everything is fairly small, create something larger. And the viewer's eye will land on that because it is different in scale or size. On the other hand, if everything is large in the design, you add something that's quite small as a focal point, you will bring attention to it. When all elements in a design are the same size, even if they are different in color and in shape, you have to use a different means of creating a focal point. So in this invitation, ano yung unang manonotice mo pag nakita mo to? Kung ako, yung pangalan ng ikakasal. Okay? Susunod, yung ito, kasi mas malaki yung size niya kaysa dito. And then, the date and the place. Okay? So that's how you create emphasis or focal point using size or scale. Next, how will we create a focal point by isolating a certain element of your design? Separating an element or group of elements from the crowd brings focus to it. It stands out from its surrounding rather than blends in. Isolation is actually a type of framing. So in this example, we isolated this image, pero kung i-open mo yung poster na yan, ang unang mapapansin mo actually is this image. Okay? So, yung purpose natin na magbigay ng emphasis, na-achieve natin. Also in here, kung itong heading, kasize nito, or hindi siya na-isolate, yung heading is kasali dito, hindi mo siya mapapansin agad. Pero nung in-isolate siya, hiniwalay siya sa ibang elements ng composition, mas noticeable siya or mas napapansin siya. Okay? Isolating something from the rest of the crowd will bring attention to it and away from the crowd. This is how headlines and pull quotes work on blogs and in magazine articles. Okay, next, how will you create focal point using pointing? Pointing is actually a way to bring attention to something. The eye, or our eyes, is led to the focal point when other elements are positioned in order to direct the eye to it. So for this example, since our eyes tend to read from top to bottom and from left to right, kung titignan natin itong newsletter na to, ang unang mapapansin natin actually is the view, the official newsletter of any high school, and then 2, 3, 4 before the wordings underneath. Even this, ang unang mapapansin ko kung ako ito, yan, then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the wordings underneath. Okay, so that is how to create a focal point using pointing. Lastly, how will we create a focal point using framing or using a frame? A frame acts as a boundary to set something apart from the rest and tells us how to interpret what is being framed. Common framing devices include white space, parang itong Google. Noticeable yung Google sa website nila because of the negative spaces. So malalaman mo agad na dito ka pupunta because of the white spaces or negative spaces. Okay? Framing also is being emphasized because of using borders, margins, and cropping. So in this example, so naka-center siya. So we have a margin and meron siyang border. So the word the great warehouse sale is more noticeable or more emphasized because of the use of this frame. Have you ever looked at something that makes your eyes hurt? A magazine cover, for example, that had a red background with a red text. Or a newspaper ad that is barely legible because the dark gray text was printed against black. These are examples of lack of contrast, which is the next principle of design. One of the most common complaints designers have about client feedback often revolves around clients who say a design needs to pop more. While that sounds like a completely arbitrary term, what the client generally means is that the design needs more contrast. Contrast is what people mean when they say a design pops. Contrast is also defined as the difference in visual properties that makes one object distinguishable from other objects. Like this example movie poster here. I can legibly read the text of this poster because of its effective color contrast. Say you're creating a poster for a concert. You should ask yourself, what is the first piece of information my audience needs to know? Is it the title of the event? Is it the band? Is it the concert venue? What about the date and the cost of attending? How will you apply the principle of contrast if your client binigyan ka niya ng project na ganito? Okay? The first thing you need to do is to make a mental outline. You should know what will be included in the poster. After that, you let your brain organize the information. Okay? Ano yung bibigyan ko ng pinaka-heavy na focal point or emphasis? Ano yung susunod na bibigyan ko ng emphasis? Okay? Pag decided ka na, you lay out your design in a way that communicates that order. Like for example, if the band's name is the most essential information, place it in the center or make it the biggest element on the poster. Another way, you could put it in the strongest, boldest type. Just take note that writing without an outline or building without a blueprint, if you start your composition without a clear idea of what you're trying to communicate, for sure, your design will not succeed. We will discuss how to add contrast to your design in detail in a separate lesson. Every element of a design, typography man yan, color, image, shapes, patterns, etc., carries a visual weight. Some elements are heavy and draw the eye, while other elements are lighter. The way these elements are laid out on a page should create a feeling of balance. Balance, which is the third principle of design, is how the elements within a composition are arranged to create the impression of equality in weight or importance. Balance also provides stability and structure in a particular design. Let me give you a practical example. Objects in design carry weight just like in the physical world, and it's called visual weight. The visual weight of a design needs to have a balance. It's like putting two objects, for example, this and this. Let's put this object on a seesaw. If one side is too heavy, the viewer's eye goes directly to the heavy part, isn't it? If it's weighted with all things equal, for example, pareho sila ng size, pareho sila ng weight, pareho sila ng style, pareho sila ng color. The seesaw is perfectly suspended without either side touching the ground. There are two types of balance. We have symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. Symmetrical designs lay out elements of equal weight on either side of an imaginary center line. It states that if a line is drawn through the center of an image, both sides will be very similar if not identical. This line can be drawn horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. The landing page for Pulugar website, for example, uses a reflectional symmetry to present their products in style. A bottle appears in the center and swirly shapes form on each side of it. Symmetry is also exemplified on the website for ZAG. If you split the design down the center, you'll see everything basically reflects perfectly, creating a nice horizontal balance. You'll also see in this example for Paradox Labs, the balance is predominantly vertical. If you fold the design along the horizontal axis, the top and bottom elements remain balanced vertically. Even in this poster of Sherlock Holmes, it has been made with a combination of visual elements, keeping in mind the symmetry between the left and right hand side. Design elements on the left side of the balance with right hand side elements such as the right side of the mirror. Asymmetrical balance, on the other hand, uses elements of differing weights, often laid out in relation to a line that is not centered within the overall design. The best way to understand how asymmetrical balance works is with the art of rack balancing. In this image, you can see a group of balancing racks. The composition is not symmetric kasi iba naman yung number of racks yan dito, iba din yung size ng rack dyan dito. Hindi siya kumbaga reflected or hindi siya mirrored. Okay? The composition is not symmetric even though the racks look perfectly balanced. Even if the sides aren't equal to each other, the composition still evokes harmony and visual balance. Let me give you a practical example. This side for heathery CBD oil might look symmetric at first glance, but it's actually the most subtle asymmetric balance possible. The product title is centered on the screen, creating an initial symmetry, but the dropper bottles are on the left. Hindi nakasenter yung mga bottles kung titignan natin ng mabuti. This leaves more empty space on the right than the left. Curiously, the yellow chat button is what creates the balance. Since mas maluwang dito sa right compare sa left kasi medyo naigilid sa left yung ating mga bottles, balance pa rin siyang tignan because of this chat button. 31.3 is asymmetrically balanced with the large image on the right, balancing the text and smaller images on the left. The fourth principle of design is movement. Movement refers to the principle that good design controls the eye's flow through a composition. This means that the most important element should lead to the second most important and so on. Visual movement is used to guide the viewer through the piece. Lines, shapes, color, and hierarchy can all be used to guide the viewer from one point to the next. Visual movement is more commonly known in the graphic design world as flow. Movement also needs to be balanced. Too much movement will exhaust your viewer, so learn to use it sparingly. Interestingly, due to the fact that we read from top to bottom and left to right, we tend to view items as such. You will notice a lot of design will have a big, bold heading at the top, and the most important element will be at the and the least important element will be at the bottom due to the way we read and view things. It is not a good idea to have your most important element at the top, your second most important element way at the bottom, and then the rest of the information is scattered throughout your composition. This causes too much movement and your viewer won't know where to look. Let's take a look at more practical example. The image of Alastair all day here is leaning toward the right. initially guiding your eye to the right. After a brief stop there, you are drawn below to the lower text and then drawn to the bottom right corner where you're asked why you need a writer. Similar to all day, the image of Andrea is facing left, guiding the eye to the large, colorful title, then below to the audio player. The background, header, footer are dark to allow you to focus on the content in the center of the site. Awesome use of visual hierarchy and color to guide the eye is also used in this design. The logo, the caption, and the navigation create a triangle. The large colored blocks, which are these shapes, that frame each element lead the eye in a slight zigzag pattern downward from the upper left corner down to the navigation. Draper has a very clever design here. They have combined their domain, animation, so the rain is falling here, so there are raindrops, and artwork to create a downward movement. Everything above the boxes, these are the boxes, is geared toward the downward motion from the raindrops that are falling to the unique tall text where all these elements converge on the boxes below. Another example, this one is easy. You've got a bright yellow stripe that moves from upper left to the lower right where the navigation, these are your navigation menus, and sponsors are located. This is a good example of simple and bold movement. Another example, this site uses shape, type, and cold contrast here to guide you where you need to go. Your eye naturally splits this site into three areas because the top layer has a very low contrast. The middle layer builds a deeper contrast using text or typography, and the third layer uses dark boxes for an attention-grabbing contrast. Your eye can't help move directly south to the navigation once this page loads. The fifth principle of design is pattern. Pattern is also known as rhythm or repetition. It could be said that repetition in design is a type of brainwashing. The more we see of something, the more we familiarize with it. A good example of the use of repetition in design is in branding. In any good brand, there will be a consistent use of a graphic style or language, kung napapansin nyo. This can manifest in many forms, such as the use of a particular color, like for example here, a consistent use of typeface or set of chosen typefaces, the use of shapes, motifs, patterns, alignment, photography style, tone of voice, and so on. All this is not done as a coincidence. This is a carefully orchestrated design to create a noticeable and memorable look and feel. It is valuable to any business that their brand is impressionable and memorable. Another good example is in magazines. If you flick through any well-designed magazine like this, you will notice a consistent style throughout. So for this example, gumamit siya ng pare-parehong typefaces. Gumamit din siya ng image ng pizza. Okay? In here, the use of common typeface is also applied. Okay? The composition or the layout is very consistent or repeated. This is done to create a particular user experience, which you will become fond of and want to experience again and again. Repetition keeps your design consistent and ties your work together. Think of how this brand uses the same pattern and general color scheme throughout all of their products. Memorable, right? That's repetition. Companies also build their brand using repetition of design attributes across their physical and digital presence. They use a predefined set of colors, fonts, and rules of application that gives consistency to their appearance across multiple channels. Repetition is responsible in making users recall a brand. Take a look at the presentation deck here. The slides convey a repetition of a set of colors and the style of text and images. This helps users identify each slide as part of a bigger whole. Repeating colors, fonts, words, or shapes can also help tie your design and overall look together. It also helps people remember your brand or other important information. Employ repetition in your overall content strategy by using consistent colors, fonts, and brand imagery to help people recognize your brand. Now, what happens when you put it all together? How do all of these elements work with one another? The way elements are arranged so that the image is seen as a whole and overall creates a visually compelling composition is called unity, which is the sixth principle of design. Unity, also known as harmony, refers to all elements and principles on the composition working together and communicating with one voice. It relates to the consistency of the design and making sure all the elements relate with one another. At the end of the day, if all your elements and principle do not form a unity, you will need to reconsider your design approach. Let's take a look at this example. The use of a blue throughout the design, including the blue overlays on the image here, along with the consistent use of typography and proportion. It creates a sense of unity in the design. Unity can be interpreted in two ways: conceptual unity or visual unity. Conceptual unity can be described as singleness or the act of combining things for the user's convenience. Like for this example, this website here uses a fixed sidebar or fixed menu here so that the user will no longer proceed or will no longer go to another web page when they open a certain menu here. It's best achieved by thinking about content and function. For example, if the content or functionality on one screen can be unified with another web page, so instead of opening another web page, you can open the content of your website in one part or one page. Okay, you can do that to reduce the number of interactions required by the user to meet their objective. Another example, let's say an action requires the user to be logged in. It would be more convenient to display the login at the same time the sign up forms side by side, as opposed to displaying the login form by default and having a link to the sign up form. So instead of using a link for the user to proceed to a sign up form, pwede mo namang pagsamahin sa iisang web page yung sign in or sign up and sign in or login. Conceptual unity requires related actions to be grouped together in a natural, forward-thinking way. Visual unity, on the other hand, is best described as harmony, which is a design principle in its own right. It can apply to colors, using styles that work well together, and in some cases, repeating styles to maintain visual consistency. Repeating style elements will help to unify the entire composition. Just simply using consistent fonts like this website and colors will really go a long way in unifying a composition as a whole. Take a look at this website. Yung nakikita nyo ngayon sa screen. You can simply repeat certain styles throughout the website in order to unify the elements. Branding a website with particular colors, So dito, ang ginagamit niyang kulay is ito and then the teal one and then black. Branding is a great way to unify a product, but even creating a simple brand for a website is a great and easy way to achieve unity. For example, visual unity could be considered when choosing two different colors that need to complement each other well, or choosing the same color for some parts of your composition because they're equally important, like here. So there are two colors na nagamit dito. Naglagay siya ng kulay kasi these two action buttons or call to action buttons are both equally important. In the 1920s, a group of German psychologists developed theories around how people perceive the world around them, and they called it the Gestalt Principles. For example, what do you see when you look at this image? If you are like most people, you probably see a triangle, isn't it? But in reality, all that's there are three white Pac-Men or three sliced circle. We see the triangle because our brains take the ambiguous visual information and organize it into something that makes sense to us. That is something familiar, orderly, symmetrical, and that we understand. When this cognitive process kicks in, our minds leap from comprehending all of the elements as individual and unrelated components to seeing the entire shape as a whole. And as a result, we perceive forms and objects where none were created. To further illustrate this process, check out this gift. Your brain sees a dog walking, isn't it? But if you look closely, it's nothing more than a series of moving dots. These are simple examples, but they demonstrate the types of shortcuts our brains make all the time to quickly make sense of the world. The Gestalt principle consists of four laws. We have proximity, similarity, continuity, and closure. The principle of proximity states that things that are close together appear to be more related than things that are spaced further apart. Having the group of circles at the left, we can all agree that it seems as though they belong together. But if we move the six circles at the right, it seems as though we have two groups of circles. We still have the same circles, isn't it? But due to the distance between them, they seem to no longer belong together. When then is proximity applied, or where then is proximity applied? Well, let's try again. I want you to closely examine these symbols or icons. Can you recognize any of them? I am sure you can identify some of the shapes. You have probably identified a bee in this side, a fish, a dove, a tree, and so on. But my question is, where have you seen these specific icons before? Do you still don't know? If you did, good on you. But most of us will only realize when I change the proximity of these symbols. Have any of you ever seen this logo? You're correct. This is the Unilever logo, and we can all clearly identify that it forms the letter U by simply changing the proximity of each icon. Let's see some practical examples of proximity in design. In this Walmart website, the nearness of each image and its corresponding text communicates that they are related to one another. The Vice website also uses it to distinguish between the images, headlines, and descriptions and other information for each of its stories. The second law of Gestalt is the similarity. The principle of similarity states that when things appear to be similar to each other, We group them together, and we also tend to think they have the same function. For instance, in this image, there appear to be two separate and distinct groups based on shape. We have the circles and the squares, and even the triangles. A variety of design elements like color and organization can be used to establish similar groups. In this image, for example, even though all of the shapes are the same, it's clear that each column represents a distinct group because of the color. Due to the similarity in shape and motion, these circles also look quite unified. But by simply changing one aspect, we will be able to break them apart. GitHub website uses the similarity principle in two ways on the page. First, they use it to distinguish different sections. So we have three sections here. You can immediately tell that the gray section at the top serves a different purpose than the black section and the blue section, which is also separate from different than the others. Second, they also use the color blue to distinguish links from regular text. So these are links, the blue ones, and these are the regular text, to communicate that all blue text shares common function. Continuity, which is the third law of Gestalt, links to the principle of movement, which we spoke about earlier. Our minds will follow a line instead of breaking it up. Think about a cross. We do not see it as four separate lines, but rather we view it as one horizontal line overlapping one vertical line. The principle of continuity also states that elements that are arranged on a line or curve, okay, elements that are arranged on a line or on a curve are perceived to be more related than elements not on the line or curve. Kung tutusin, kung titignan nyo to, ito yung magkakagrupo, and then ito yung magkagrupo. Pero our eyes tend to see this as a whole and this as a whole. In this image, for example, the red dots in the curve line seem to be more related to the black dots. So for example, this red line seems to be related here than here. And also with the black dots. The black dots seem to be related to the red dots here. The black dots here seem to be related to here than here. Let's take a look at some practical examples. The continuity principle can be applied to the official Olympic Games logo. If someone asks you to describe the Olympic logo, how would you describe it? 5 multicolored circles joined together. Well, this is exactly what the principle of continuity is about. We do not view different circles being cut up, but rather 5 circles joined together. Amazon uses continuity to communicate that each of the products is similar and related to each other. Sprig also uses it to explain the 3-step process to use their app. So there is continuity here. And Credit Karma uses it to illustrate the benefits that their services provide. The last law of Gestalt is closure. Our minds will fill in gaps and see illusions that actually do not exist. This is known as the Gestalt Principle of closure. Closure is a very clever way of creating logo concepts nowadays, and it makes use of a clever way of combining positive and negative space, as we have discussed earlier or in the previous lesson. For example, you might think that you are seeing a triangle, but in fact, you are simply viewing 3 evenly spaced sliced circles. The principle of closure also states that when we look at a complex arrangement of visual elements, we tend to look for a single recognizable pattern. In other words, when you see an image that has missing parts, your brain will fill in the blanks and make a complete image so you can still recognize the pattern. For example, When you look at the image, here, you most likely see a zebra even though the image is just a collection of black shapes. Your mind fills in the missing information to create recognizable pattern. The closure principle is also used often in logo designs at a variety of companies including IBM, NBC, Zendex, and funding circles. Another great example of the Gestalt Principle closure at play is the FedEx logo. Can you identify how closure plays a role here? I want you to look carefully at the letters and think specifically with regards to negative space. Can you see it? Examining the logo, you will see that there is an arrow between the letter E and X. Let's look at another example. Everybody is probably familiar with the Toblerone chocolate logo. But have you ever witnessed the Gestalt principle of closure at play here? Once you see it, you will never unsee it. There is a bear hidden in the mountain. All of these elements and principles we have mentioned are objective and they might be more or less depending on who you speak with. At the end, the design elements and principles will always be based on the same building blocks and we will always have the same end result no matter what you call them. Having said this effective visual hierarchy is the end result of using your elements and principles of design effectively. Visual hierarchy relates to the order of elements on your composition. It has to do with what you see first, second, third, and so on. As mentioned, you will need to identify the most important element of your composition. And by combining the elements and principles of design, you can be sure that this element is the focal point. This is all that visual hierarchy is about. Visual hierarchy normally applies to mostly text elements, but other visuals can also be influenced. Let's look at how visual hierarchy has been applied. Again, considering that we read from left to right and top to bottom, the first word element we see is hockey tryouts. Here. Not only is that at the top, but it is also way bigger than all the other top elements. The next element that catches your eye is probably the pointing hand and the wordings underneath and above the hockey tryouts. The aim of your elements and principles at the end is to make sure that the most important element, in other words, your focal point, is seen first. And this is exactly what visual hierarchy is about. If you are not sure what the most important elements are, it is normally the heading, and also perhaps a related image that might be second in line. Congratulations on completing Lesson 3. Please feel free to give me your feedback and any suggestions for me to improve my instruction. If you have questions regarding the lesson, please feel free to email me or contact me via Messenger. Please take note that other contents of this lesson, including images, were lifted from the following sites. Thank you for staying with me. For our next lesson, we will learn the color psychology. See you at the next video.